Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea's economy continues to recover, but according to the Korea Development Institute, the fourth wave of the coronavirus presents some uncertainties, such as continued weakness in in-person services and rising raw material prices. South Korea reports the highest yet number of new coronavirus cases on a Tuesday at almost 1,600, which could mean a rise in the days to come. And Hyundai Motor announces its overall vision for taking hydrogen-powered technology mainstream by 2040, unveiling new prototypes and concepts. Also, Germany's biggest motor show begins with a focus on sustainability and mobility more broadly. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. Since the early months of the pandemic, South Korea's economy has been recovering quite strongly. But according to a report from the Korea Development Institute, the fourth wave of the virus presents some growing uncertainties. The in-person service sector is still struggling. And for industry, raw material prices are rising. Seo In-kyung reports.
South Korea is seeing more economic uncertainty amid a surge in COVID-19 cases and a rise in the cost of raw materials. The Korea Development Institute said on Tuesday that the economy has been recovering at a moderate pace over the past few months, despite tightened social distancing measures from July. It said that the manufacturing sector continued to improve, backed by strong demand, both from within the country and overseas, and the service sector showed modest signs of recovery. Exports in August increased by near 35% compared to the previous year, led by key items such as semiconductors and petroleum products. The service sector showed signs of recovery, mainly from the wholesale and retail sectors, as well as finance and insurance. But in-person services such as restaurants continued to struggle. The spread of COVID-19 as well as the rising raw material prices have also weakened economic sentiment. The KDI said the Composite Consumer Sentiment Index, which measures the level of optimism that consumers have about the economy, stood at 102.5 in August, down by 0.7 points from the previous month. The think tank also stated that along with the hike in virus cases, rising raw material prices have weakened corporate sentiment. With the majority of companies pessimistic about the economy, the Business Sentiment Index for September dropped to 94, marking 2 consecutive months of decline.
If the spike in COVID-19 cases continues, it will partially limit the recovery in domestic demand, especially for the in-person service sector. Accordingly, South Korea could be at risk of falling short of its projected 4% economic growth rate this year.
The expert added that to turn this around, vaccinations must be sped up and distancing measures eased to boost consumer confidence. Seo In-kyung, Arirang News.
And things continue to recover for South Korea in trade. In July, the country's broadest measure of trade, the current account posted a surplus for a 15th month in a row. The surplus came to a little over $8.2 billion, which was a slight decline from the surplus the month before. The last time South Korea logged a deficit was in April 2020, the month after the WHO declared a global pandemic. The surplus in goods for July came to about $5.7 billion. Exports were up in July from a year earlier by almost 30%, and that trend, the BOK expects, will continue through the end of the year. South Korea's Hyundai Motor Group has announced a vision for making hydrogen-powered cars and other products mainstream by 2040. Hyundai Chairman Chung Yi-sun presented the vision on Tuesday at an online press conference called Hydrogen Wave, which introduced the company's hydrogen-based products and technologies. Hyundai unveiled its first prototype of a hydrogen-powered hybrid sports car called the Vision FK, which can accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in just 4 seconds. The firm also revealed an unmanned cargo vehicle called E-Bogie, described as a hydrogen-powered trailer drone. Hyundai said it can be used for freight transport, construction, rescue operations, and more. Chung added that as a responsible member of the global community, Hyundai Motor Group will work to help build what he called the Hydrogen Society. And one of the world's biggest motor shows is set to kick off today in Munich, Germany. It's the first major trade show in the country to welcome visitors in person since the start of the pandemic. That's the International Mobility Show, also known as IAA. This year, the focus is on eco-friendly transport and mobility more broadly. Our Han Sung-woo has more.
Germany's biggest motor show has gone eco-friendly for 2021. IAA Mobility, which has moved from Frankfurt to Munich, is now not just about cars, but mobility in general. Themed Mobility of the Future, this year's edition features not only brand new four-wheelers, but also electric scooters and bikes, as well as trams, buses, and autonomous cars. Not every automaker is present, but German heavyweights Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and Volkswagen are all there, promoting their latest products, from electric vehicles to a recyclable concept car. Some have welcomed the exhibition and its efforts to introduce more sustainable transportation methods.
It's good that it is happening in different locations. It is something new and it matches the times we're in. We all talk about virtuality, and I think it's great and exciting.
But others doubt whether the event is necessary amid the pandemic.
It is interesting how everyone can see that the industry still has enough money to set up large stands like these. I don't want to be negative about it, but I think they have to do a bit more to persuade people at the end of the day.
One auto expert says the shift away from cars themselves means the motor show loses some of its meaning.
There are many bicycles, but there are fewer cars. A car show should be focused because the car is undergoing a big renaissance. The car is very much on the rise with the electric car.
According to Reuters, environmental groups like Greenpeace are planning a major demonstration on Saturday against what they call the greenwashing of the auto industry. One activist organization has even warned of, quote, mass civil disobedience. As a result, the motor show, which ends on Sunday, will see the biggest police presence for an event in Munich in 2 decades. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
In other news, El Salvador became the first country in the world on Tuesday to make Bitcoin legal tender, meaning the virtual currency is recognized by law as a means of paying for things, including taxes and debts. The government started the ball rolling on Monday by announcing that it bought 400 Bitcoins worth over $21 million at current trading prices. To promote the currency, President Nayib Bukele has promised $30 to each citizen who downloads the government's Bitcoin app called Chivo Wallet. The government's also reportedly installing more than 200 Bitcoin ATMs. Recent opinion polls show, however, that the majority of El Salvador's population reject the idea and will continue to use the U.S. dollar, which has been their legal currency for the last 20 years. Elon Musk's company, SpaceX, has been cleared to launch its first all-civilian crew into outer space next week. The mission is called Inspiration 4, and it's scheduled to launch on September 15th from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The crew will be inside the Crew Dragon spacecraft, launched on SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket. The mission is commanded by 38-year-old billionaire Jared Isaacman, who's an accomplished pilot. He's not said how much he paid for the flight, but he's donated $100 million to St. Jude's Children's Hospital. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, good afternoon. Thank you for making time today.
Good afternoon.
Well, let's start with stocks, and of course Wall Street was closed on Monday for Labor Day, but elsewhere in Europe stocks were higher on anticipation that the U.S. jobs numbers and other factors could mean the Fed starts tapering later rather than sooner. A very broad index of European equities, the Stoxx 600, back right about where it was at its most recent high last month. What's the story in the global markets?
Yes, if you look at the U.S. labor market news, the employment numbers came in at much below the expectation, 250,000 or so, which is 1/3 of 250,000, which is about 1/3 of what was expected. And because of this, people are saying that the tapering might be delayed and that interest rate hike might not be coming in anytime soon. And therefore, the liquidity condition of the overall market should be quite ample, and therefore, people are quite positive about the equity market. European equity market, while U.S. was closed, was up about 1% on Monday and also continues to move up quite nicely even today. If you look at the German's economic numbers, are coming in at better than expected, where the factory orders rose by 3.4% in July, following the 4.6% increase in June, beating the market expectation of 1% decline. All in all, we think that the overall market condition is quite positive in that the economy is moving quite nicely in terms of the recovery, while the overall boosting measures should be continue to come through from China as well as Japan, and while also U.S. tapering issue would be a bit delayed, and particularly for interest rate hike, we're not going to see that happening anytime near soon. So therefore, we are in a very nice Goldilocks era where we think that the equity market in general should go further up higher in the future.
Well, staying in Europe for a minute, the European Central Bank will be meeting on Thursday to decide what to do with its own stimulus program and when to start tapering. A lot of investors watching the ECB this week. Tell us about that and what you're expecting from this meeting.
Right. I think that we have to really compare what is the balance sheet of the ECB versus the U.S. If you look at the central bank's balance sheets, if you look at Japan, it's about 135% of GDP. And ECB, it's about 80% of GDP. As for the U.S., it's only about 40%. So clearly, it's in the middle, but nevertheless, it is quite a big size. So people are concerned about continuing this kind of measures would mean that the interest rate environment of Europe would be exactly the same as what had been for Japan. And Japan's balance sheet has blossomed to 135%. Right now, the ECB is about 80%. If then U.S. decides to stop the tapering, then what happens is that the dollar strengthening could happen quite aggressively, and that could be quite negative news for most of the other economies. So therefore, it's quite uncertain in terms of how they're going to approach this tapering for Europe as well. I think that they have to do this somewhat, that the size of the purchasing is quite large. It's about 80 billion euros, and that is expected to go down to about 60 billion euros. Even that, still the balance sheet of the ECB is very large. But everybody's saying that Europe suffered 20 years or plus of the very low inflation environment, and if they cut this size of the bond purchasing, it might really result into another disinflation era, and that could be a concern. So all in all, we think that we have to watch and see how ECB does their monetary policy. But I think that the trend is expected to be where, with the economy recovering, the size should be reduced quite gradually.
Right. Well, today, Korean stocks down a little bit. Local retail investors back to buying, foreigners and institutions selling. Big names like Samsung, SK Hynix, Naver among those lower today. Tell us about the domestic market.
Right. The Kospi was down by about 0.5%. Kosdaq was slightly up by 0.14%. And the reason for this kind of volatility is because tomorrow is the quadruple witching day, where everybody's been kind of playing the short selling plays since the August. If you look at the volatility of Kospi, have been very volatile. I think that the foreigners been net selling quite significantly, and that has resulted into the volatilities, and they're going to play out until this closing of the futures and options market for September. But after that, we think that the market is very good position to rise. If you look at the Chinese market, the overall Shanghai index is going up quite nicely. Shenzhen index is also up quite nicely in 2 days. The stimulus plan is coming through, and also Japan is talking about stimulus plan as well. All in all, I think that Korea is in a quite good position where the overall earnings numbers are looking good and economic numbers are looking good. Only concern that is because of the rate hike that we did see from the BOK. But I guess people can look at that as a positive indicator where foreign investors could come back to Korea in a quite aggressive fold, given the fact that the rates are higher. So all being said, I think that it's volatility. What we're seeing right now in Korean market is very short term. Is expected to be lived in short term. Probably in the future, after this futures close, options are closed, the market should further go up in the future.
Well, we'll look forward to discussing that later in the week, Mr. Yu. And finally, data showing Korea posted a current account surplus in July for a 15th month in a row. That's since the start of the pandemic. Basically, the deficit posted the last deficit was right when the pandemic started. So we're back in the black in July by about $8.2 billion. What's behind that surplus, and what do you make of the economy in general?
Yes, as I said, Korean economy is doing quite well. And that is showing in the export numbers. If you look at the export, it was up 34.9% year on year to 53.93 billion in August, was slightly less than the market consensus of 35.7% rise. But nevertheless, it continues to show a very strong number. And this was the 10th straight month of expansion in sales amid robust foreign demand in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, if you look at the export segment, semiconductors, petrochemicals, and cars jumped 43%, 81.5%, and 16.9% respectively. And clearly, that is the main driver for the export. But in addition to that, the shipment grew for wireless devices, the biohealth product, and secondary batteries, and shipment rose to China, U.S., Japan, and EU, and Asian countries. All in all, it seems that the Korean products are in major demand. And with this, we did see current account surplus widen to 8.21 billion in July. And all in all, this is quite positive news. We think that this kind of trend should continue as the demand for the electric cars and the battery continues to rise, and also the other economic sensitive segment also. Also on top of that, the semiconductor business would continue to do quite well. All in all, this means that the Korean won depreciation trend is not going to be continuing. We did see the Korean won falling from 1180 to about 1150. Now it's back up, slightly up again to 1157 because of the foreign net selling in the equity market. But after the futures and options closing, we think that the currency would probably nicely move into more of a appreciation period, and that we do expect the Korean won to appreciate to as low as 1130 probably over the next few months.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much for sharing your insights with us as always. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
There's been little or no progress in reaching out to North Korea in the weeks since the inter-Korean communication lines were restored this summer. South Korea's unification minister Lee In-young says the North right now is focused on internal challenges caused by sanctions, the pandemic, and flood damage. At the National Assembly's Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee on Tuesday, Minister Yi said the regime's trade volume with China plunged 82% on year after it closed its borders due to the pandemic. He said Seoul is monitoring the regime ahead of its upcoming events, like its National Foundation Day on Thursday and the anniversary of the ruling party's founding on October 10th. He also pledged to work on humanitarian cooperation aside from any political or military issues, as well as push for an early resumption of inter-Korean talks. The chief nuclear envoys of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan are likely to meet in Tokyo next week, also to discuss North Korea issues. Sources say Seoul's chief negotiator No Kyu-duk plans to meet with his U.S. counterpart Sung Kim and his Japanese counterpart Takahiro Funakoshi. They're likely to discuss providing the North with humanitarian aid, as well as managing the situation on the Korean peninsula, amid speculation that the regime has restarted its nuclear reactor at Yongbyon. The three envoys last met together in June. The South Korean and U.S. envoys met twice last month, once each in Seoul and Washington. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi will be coming to Seoul next week for talks with his South Korean counterpart Chung Eui-yong on issues including North Korea. The two last met face-to-face 5 months ago in China. According to Seoul's foreign ministry, Wang will be here from September 14th to the 15th, and the foreign ministers' meeting will be on the 15th. The two are likely to discuss North Korea issues, especially considering reports that the North may have restarted its reactor used to produce atomic bombs. Other items would likely be ways to bolster South Korea-China relations, with the two countries marking 3 decades of diplomatic ties next year. Beijing is apparently looking to prevent other countries getting too close to the U.S. The U.S. House of Representatives recently suggested including South Korea in its Five Eyes intel sharing program. And the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, is accusing North Korea of defying global rules on nuclear technology and missile systems, as well as proliferating dangerous technology. Addressing a NATO conference on arms control and WMDs on Monday, Stoltenberg said a world where NATO allies have given up their nuclear deterrence, while others, like North Korea, retain theirs, would not make the world a safer place. He also singled out China and Russia, especially criticizing Beijing for rapidly building nuclear systems under a cloak of secrecy. As a result, Stoltenberg said NATO should be clear-eyed about the challenges ahead. And the latest on the coronavirus situation here in South Korea, some restrictions are being eased in the greater Seoul area, and bigger gatherings will be allowed across the country for the Chuseok holiday coming up. But today, the country reported the highest number of cases yet for a Tuesday. Kim Sung-min reports.
The number of new COVID-19 cases in South Korea is the highest yet for any Tuesday at 1,597. That's an increase of 200 from the same day a week before, and considering that cases normally go down on Tuesdays due to less testing over the weekend, this could mean a potential uptick in the future. Of Tuesday's cases, all but 34 were locally transmitted. The Greater Seoul area, still at the highest level of social distancing, accounted for 66.4% of the total. Of particular concern is the Delta variant, which continues to spread rapidly. From August 29th to September 4th, there were some 3,090 variant cases, Delta making up 99% of them. Of those, more than 2,800 cases were locally transmitted. Many of the variant cases are breakthrough infections, meaning they're detected in people who are fully vaccinated.
To date, there have been 3,855 breakthrough cases, infecting around 0.04% of fully vaccinated people. The highest rate of infection is among people in their 30s.
Out of the 3,800 breakthrough infections, more than 82% were variants. Though case numbers remain high, the government is slowly easing some restrictions, a move toward what some are referring to as living with corona. However, health authorities on Tuesday asked people not to use the phrase, saying it could diminish the seriousness of the situation and undermine the government's virus prevention efforts. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
Today marks the second annual International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies. And in commemoration, South Korea's Foreign Ministry held an international forum on air pollution. At Tuesday's forum, held in person and online, the foreign minister highlighted the South Korean government's efforts to clean up the country's air, but stressed that we're still a long way off from achieving good air quality. The speakers and panelists at the event discussed how closely air pollution is related to climate change and how technology can help address these issues. September 7th was designated the Day of Clean Air at the UN General Assembly in 2019. The idea was proposed by South Korean President Moon Jae-in at the UN Climate Action Summit to raise awareness and facilitate actions to improve air quality. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.